All right, what is up, guys? It is Dalen here from MAPerformance. I have Kyle with me today. We are going to talk about what is difficult about modifying modern vehicles, new vehicles, what makes it so hard to get parts, tune them, and kind of everything in between. There's kind of always a lot of talk about this. We got a lot of comments about it, and figured we'd kind of address it and try to keep it as high level and kind of as simple as possible for most people to understand. Obviously, there's a lot of intricacies to this. When we talk about modifying a new car, we're talking about bolting on basic parts and possibly tuning the vehicle. And what's the kind of crux in that with most modern vehicles? We'll start with how complex designs have to be. So when we talk about making parts, so from our end as a manufacturer, when we look at a modern car and we have to manufacture like an intake or a downpipe or a catback for it, the shapes, the engine bays, everything is so much more complex than it has been in the past. And obviously this has been changing over the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years for the most part.
In most systems or most cars, there's just generally a lot more OEM systems that we have to keep working and keep happy and kind of keep always in the back of our head that there's more complexities than just a tube and a filter, like with intakes or even with exhaust. There's different active exhausts and different sensors that we all need to be aware of and make sure that all those systems are still in place and still work exactly how they were designed.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. I mean, like you think of an active exhaust valve, you think of something that like, oh, it just opens and closes. Well, with how complex modern systems are these days, if that actuator valve doesn't work, that could actually trigger a trouble code somewhere in the system that then you can't go into sport mode because that won't work and your whole car doesn't work. It used to be you drive it around, it sounds good, it fits well, and okay, sounds good. Well, we have to put thousands of miles on a car now to make sure that the valve opens a few hundred times and doesn't do something weird, like doesn't get stuck, the OEM motor doesn't burn up. Like
we have to pay a lot more attention with our intakes for heat mitigation, like false or maybe dramatized intake air temps that are like right at the filter. OEMs are placing sensors a lot closer to the intake tract to the filter.
Yes, like a sensor is going to get really hot, but the air is not actually really hot. The sensor just gets tricked. Yeah, so like heat shielding has become more important. Just packaging in general and all this stuff has become more important.
As much as I'd love to just put a big velocity stack in every single bumper of every car, it's just not happening.
If you could settle down, your Honda is showing. We have hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment to document the chassis, the engine bay, in different places of vehicles, so we can design these organic shapes. No longer is it just the box goes here. We need to have organic shapes. We need to be able to flow mold, injection mold, rotomold different pieces of parts. We have to be able to bend very complex shapes to go around different chassis features. The engine bays, like he kind of talked about, like we may have a tube that goes here, but a heat shield needs to tuck up here, and the shape of that heat shield is so complex that to try to do it by hand, hand measuring, it's going to take forever. So to try to be as efficient as possible, it's just you need a lot of expensive equipment to do things properly these days. And that's just to talk about making the parts. If we want to talk about the ECU and the electronic side of the complexities, can you touch kind of on torque model ECUs? So like a lot of people see you buy an intake for a new car, you put the intake on, it doesn't make any more power. Well, it's not that the intake isn't working well, it's actually that the ECU is changing to target something because it knows what it wants.
We'll start with the Civic Si. The Civic Si has a very, very basic throttle torque mapping table that's accessible, that essentially you have a target limit for torque that the engine sees at varied RPMs, and if the ECU sees it go above that, it will dial back the throttle and the ignition timing to just sort of quell that surge of power and kind of keep things happy. So
it's a fairly simple table, decent access to it.
It's a 2D table. It's not a hugely complicated system, because that's speaking in a very basic system.
Yeah.
You get to stuff like the Supra and some of the newer cars. They have a lot more complex system that's not just a 2D table, not a single 2D table. We're talking about 3D tables with multiple filters, multiple channels.
So let's say you go back to an early Honda ECU from, let's say, the 90s. You might have 5 things. I'm being dramatic here, but let's say you have 5 things you could change in that ECU to tune that car. You play with those 5 things, you make it what you want. You pop into the newer Supra platforms, and it's been a little bit since I've even looked at it, but there's a few hundred tables that you can modify, and then there's a couple thousand tables that we don't understand yet. The amount of things that are taken into consideration in these modern ECUs when air comes in and power comes out it's no longer a user-defined everything.
So yeah, when we talk about the Supra, when you push your foot to the floor and you command a load. ECU takes in measurements of all the sensors that are on board and is able to determine, okay, we know that we want to make X amount of torque, this is the request, what is our ceiling? How much is allowable at X RPM versus X throttle input? The ECU allows the engine to reach that point based on the sensors that it's seeing. It's measuring what it should look like to make that amount of torque.
You no longer have full control over everything you're doing. So if you think of a cable throttle body and you stepping on that cable, you're in control of what it's doing. And now, basically what you're doing is you're saying, hey car, I'd like to go really fast right now.
Did you think about it?
Can we see if that's okay with you? And so let's say you put a new intake on, that intake flows 50% more air than the factory intake, but you're on the factory calibration or factory tune. When you step on that throttle and you're like, everything's gonna be incredible now. Your foot goes, I want 500 foot-pounds of torque. And the car goes, no, we're not, no. We have a limit of 300 torque right here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull timing, we're gonna pull boost, we're gonna pull any other kind of thing that we have control over to basically trim that down to the requested torque within the ECU. So you're basically just, there's all kinds of internal limits that you no longer have the control over. At the end of the day, the complexity of modifying a new car from a manufacturer aspect and from an installer aspect is that for us to design a part, it's just a very complex process. So now once we've figured all of that out and we get a part installed into the car, the ECU has to know what it can't do. So if we're working with a factory calibration, we have to know what the limits are that we can push that car to before there's a problem with our aftermarket component. And for those of the people that are tuning the vehicles or doing that kind of stuff, the complexities involved in actually being able to access the ECU. So that's why we see the newer Supras, a lot of the newer BMWs. I think we've seen a lot of like the Korean vehicles, so like the Kias, the Hyundais and stuff like that. We're seeing that people have to run, plug-in boxes and stuff like that. And same with like the Alphas. You have to run like an external box that kind of mimics some different systems because they're not able to modify the ECU yet due to the complexities of that ECU. And we're seeing that defined by the OEMs or the manufacturers or the OEM suppliers. So it's just a complex computer strategy or security strategy that's not allowing people to get into those ECUs. So you as an end user kind of sit there and say like, well, somebody can tune that car, why can't they tune my car? It's just kind of based on production numbers. So if it's not a very widely produced car, there's a lot of time and money that goes into figuring this stuff out. And it just might not happen as often. I mean, it could be hundreds of thousands of man hours and millions of dollars in investigation just to figure that out, just so you can tune your car.
To even once you get past the complexities of being able to access the ECU, even from a very simple point, defining all of these tables and really going through and saying, this is the purpose of this, data stream.
Yeah, these ones and zeros do this.
Is only going to get more complicated as we add more things.
Exactly.
The level of complexity is going up huge, where before, where I come from, you desoldered a chip and you resoldered a plate to take one on and off.
Now, if you lower the car, your ride height sensor and your proximity sensor might not work anymore, and now now it's going to sport mode. So everything's freaks. That's also interconnected. It's super cool for people like us. It can be really, really frustrating, and as a consumer, I'm sure it's something that kind of is like can be really confusing. This is probably a really long video now, and aims for Tyler's 5 to 10 minutes. So I think we'll wrap it up. So I think at the end of the day, guys, I mean, hopefully this gives you a good rough cut down of like what makes it difficult to modify a new car. So understanding why it can take so long to both develop a part, release a part, install a part, and tune a part. Hopefully this gives you kind of a good breakdown. If you guys want to see more or more in-depth stuff, maybe we can find some even more well-versed speakers to bring in and talk about this kind of stuff if that's what you guys want to see. But this is kind of answering a lot of questions we've seen on recent videos on some of the vehicles we've been working on, and wanted to touch on it and give you guys some information from our side of the table. So as always, we appreciate you watching. We appreciate you guys clicking on the video, smashing that like button, coming down, leaving comments, telling us what you think, what we did well, what we didn't do well. If you want to see me and him on videos anymore, if you want Charlie back, he does all the cool hand motions and he's way more hyped than we are. So just like that. That was basically everything we've done. So yeah, we appreciate you guys at the end of the day. If you have any questions, we do have a sales team, a customer support team. These guys are fairly well versed in most of the modern vehicle stuff that we deal with. Call in, ask them questions. They can help you out to the best of their abilities, and they have access to all of us. They always reach out and ask us questions when you guys call in. So once again, as always, Thank you for watching the video. Hopefully this gives you a good breakdown. We appreciate you guys. And if you have any other questions, let us know.